Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, welcome back to another edition of Felony Friday, a weekly show right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Felony Friday, of course, is the only show that focuses each and every week on exposing injustice in this nation's broken criminal justice system. And man, oh man, do we have one heck of an injustice to talk about today. We're going to be talking about the case of Schaeffer Cox. And I have two guests who are joining me to go through that case and show exactly what happened. One of my guests has known Schaeffer Cox for a long time, well before any of this stuff went down and Schaeffer was arrested. And my other guest is an expert in the area and has done hours upon hours upon hours of hundreds of hours of research into this Schaeffer Cox case. I'll introduce them in just a minute. Before I do that, I just want to let you guys know that Felony Friday is not the only show on Lions of Liberty. That's right. We have two other shows on this fantastic variety show platform, the OG variety show in the libertarian podcasting circuit. We are the original. We have a show every Monday, our longest-running show, our flagship program, hosted by Mark Clare. Mark interviews leaders in the liberty movement and hosts roundtable discussions. Every Wednesday, we have Electric Liberty Land, hosted by Brian McWilliams. It's your weekly shot of culture, comedy, and liberty. And you definitely want to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, so you don't miss a beat. You don't want to miss a single one of these episodes, single one of these shows that we have here. And after you do that and you listen to shows for a while and you love it, we get the old thumbs up. What you want to do next, if you want to hear more content, you want some bonus content, we have a bunch of stuff we publish every month. We have a couple of recurring shows that we do, one called Conspiracy Corner, that is just bonus content, one called Degenerate Gamblers, that's bonus content. We have extra content with guests that we publish all the time, and you can get access to that by becoming a Patreon, by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, tossing us just $5 to get you all our content. Of course, if you give us a little bit more, you get some more stuff. You get merchandise at the $25 level. You get a monthly call with us. Lots of great stuff. So be sure to check that out. Patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. Let's get rolling right into today's episode. Today on Felony Friday, I have two guests. We're going to be talking about the Schaeffer Cox case. And if you're unfamiliar with the case, if you've heard nothing of the injustice that Schaeffer Cox is currently suffering, then you've come to the right place today. We're going to be talking about that. But if you are familiar with it, you still come to the right place, because this is going to be a deep dive, and you're going to be hearing about a lot of details about this case that probably you haven't heard anywhere else. I'll be introducing two guests. First off, I want to introduce Jacob Shreffler. Jacob, welcome to Felony Friday.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, John.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, man. And I think you reached out to me, about a month ago, I think. And, I told you I remembered reading about Schaeffer's case, and I hadn't looked into the details. I hadn't heard recent updates, which is remiss on my part, because we talked on the phone and you brought me up to speed, sent me a bunch of links to do some research, and I wanted to have you on to talk through this case. So thanks for coming on.
Okay, well, I guess the first thing that we need to start with is we'll introduce Bryan Christie. Bryan Christie was a friend of Schaeffer Cox. Why don't you tell us about yourself, Bryan?
Yeah, I'm a friend of Schaeffer Cox, and I was a witness to the whole thing as it came down years ago. And I knew what was going on, what the media was saying about him, and what he was supposed to have been doing was not quite true. And it was a big setup, because he was running around the countryside having town hall meetings in Alaska and several different states, exposing corruption, a lot of corruption going on in the state, local governments, of course, federal, state, everywhere it is, But so
Schaeffer was a libertarian, right? And he was running for Republican Party in the Alaska State House in Fairbanks. Isn't that right?
Yeah, he was running for State House in Fairbanks, and he got 38% of the vote in a three-way race at 24 years of age. He was homeschooled. He's a brilliant guy. And I met him one day. He was working. I saw him doing some carpenter work, and I just got talking to him. And eventually he came over and put a dozen new windows in my apartment building that I had at the time. And I got talking to him more and found out he is the most brilliant guy to talk to about the founding of the United States, et cetera, the way things, the founding fathers, what they went through and why this is this way it is. And I was impressed with him, you know, and I knew some of it, but this guy knows way more than I do. And so he started being attacked for what he was saying and exposing. And the FBI came in here, set him up, and they were going to eliminate the Schaeffer Cox problem, they said, out at this radio program that he was on out in North Pole, which is an isolated radio station. But that plan to get rid of him got stifled when the owner of the property came out, wondering what all these armed people were doing out there. And so then he went on to gain fame as a local guy sticking up for law enforcement. He started a Liberty Bell program where if you wanted somebody to come and be a witness, just a witness to what was going on between you and the police, like maybe you were the only person or whatever, you could do that. And I thought it was a good thing. And I was on the thing, and, you know, they would call you and you go, just be a witness.
Bryan, if I can jump in. So he started the Liberty Bell program or whatever, coalition, whatever you call it. That was prior to his run for office, or was that after he ran for office?
That was after that, and then he did that, and then he had the Peacekeepers militia, which amounted to, I think there were maybe 7 people in the thing. About 7 people in a Peacekeeper militia, but it was a neighborhood group, you know, and he is a non-violent type guy. So they were trying to press him into. The FBI came to town trying to provoke him into some violence in order to bring charges against him.
And when we talk about what a militia, what this militia is, it's not a traditional militia in the sense that they're actually being corporal punishment. It's more of like a neighborhood watch group. It's voluntary, and I believe it's a
constitutional militia.
Am I right about that?
It's the militia described in the Constitution. You know, that's what we go by.
And this was in Alaska, right? I'm assuming it's probably pretty common. Or maybe not common, but there's probably other militias in Alaska, I would assume.
Oh, yeah, there's other militias, I guess. But it's just a neighborhood group of people that were protecting their families and their neighborhoods and watching neighborhoods and stuff like we do, like neighborhood watch, similar, same thing. And they came into town, and because he knew too much about what was going on with the corruption, they came into town, set him up, and so-called infiltrated his militia, which amounted to going in the backyard when he was having a barbecue. And so they pressured Mr. Cox tried to pressure him into a corner and get him to start some sort of violence, and he refused to do it. He's a Christian, and he describes himself as a Gandhi, not a Rambo.
So the whole time this was being done with undercover informants that are getting paid up to maybe $300,000 by the FBI per conviction. Am I right about that?
Yeah, there was at least a couple of informants, and they were getting paid, and they offered to drop charges against them that they had. For one guy was installing septic tanks or something, taking money, and there was a couple of felonies involved, plus they were drug runners for Hell's Angels. One of them was. And so they were paid $300,000, like you say, a piece or so, to pin something on this guy, and they could never get anything on, so I made up phony charges. The state of Alaska had a case against Mr. Cox, but they dropped the entire case, and the feds picked it up and just added on all these phony charges, like Schaeffer supposedly had some hand grenades, but I think it was grenades that the that the perpetrators of the crime dropped off, but they were just inert hand grenades. They weren't even. So Schaeffer Cox gets charged for weapons charges, and one thing was the hand grenades. Another thing was one of these things you buy at the boat store, the signal flare for your boat. You carry in your boat.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with that. But then they used all this sort of thing and got charges against him and set him up with a phony trial. And
if we can backtrack or I don't know if it's backtracking, but go back to sort of the build up to the trial to kind of set the stage, because I don't know how familiar my listeners are with this. Some of them might have no idea. So we and whoever wants to take this, Bryan or Jacob, take it. But the corruption. I mean, the corruption I've read about, had to do with, and I didn't even realize this or think about it, but Alaska. I guess there's really two cities in Alaska, right? And any drugs that come into Alaska are going to come through those cities. And I guess Schaeffer was exposing some of that. And was there also an element of, was there, child sex trafficking going on too, to some degree, that he was exposing? Or
there was everything. Yep.
What's the story behind that?
This has to do with the fact that Schaeffer actually knew somebody who had been a victim of, I believe, child abuse that was probably linked to drug trafficking task force. And I don't, for whatever reason, when he started this Liberty Bell network, and when he was running for office, there were about 6 families or so that approached him with child abuse issues that the police weren't going to do anything about. And it seems that there's a strong suspicion that there's a lot of a drug task force pedophilia issues that are going on.
No doubt.
If we don't know the background of this, in Alaska, this is a local political issue. There was a man named Joseph Boehm, and there's some articles about him on a website called Alaska Unsilenced, and I can get some links for that at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph Boehm was a businessman, and he was convicted of child trafficking, and he was having sex with a minor who was the daughter of someone who happened to be worked on Senator Ted Stevens' home in the famous Ted Stevens bribery situation. And the reason I bring that up is that there were about 6 families that had child trafficking issues that had complained to Schaeffer Cox to see if he could help investigate and maybe help out with the situation. And I think that the evidence is pretty strong that there's something going on in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Alaska, which is supporting child molesters. So apparently, there's a pedo ring which has participation in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Alaska. That would be my assessment. But what do you think of that, Bryan?
That's possible. There's just corruption everywhere.
Because
possibility. I know that's what Schaeffer was bringing up. He was bringing up this subject, and that's what led to his whole demise.
Yeah,
and
Schaeffer actually made a letter called Narco Pervs that says that he thinks that there's a lot of child molesters that are actually inside the Alaska judiciary because of the way the judiciary is structured and the way it has been compromised historically. So he put out a letter about that, and that's the most likely the political reason behind why he was targeted in the first place.
Yes, there's some reason. I guess what I'm getting at there's some reason he's targeted. Maybe it was a couple reasons. Maybe it's because of the militia. Maybe it was because of him exposing this corruption and this child sex abuse. But I mean, and Bryan was going through the list of reasons, and I mean, this is crazy stuff. When you read about the Schaeffer Cox story, I don't know if you guys can kind of go into details on some of the FBI tactics that were used, because this is just nuts, just off the wall nuts. A guy by the name of, I guess, Bill Fulton was one of the FBI FBI investigators, FBI dispatch undercovers. And
Bill Fulton's a big part of it.
He was trying to convince Schaeffer to go on a shooting spree a couple times, or they were trying to get Schaeffer to go on a shooting spree, and Schaeffer was he came over to my house, obviously shaken, and it must have been after this we figured it out later, and then I found out there are more witnesses than I ever knew of years ago. There's about 6 people I know of that would have been witness, and one of those guys was Schaeffer when this happened, when they pulled a knife on him. They were going to, let this guy bleed out at the feet. And he was a witness. Schaeffer came over to my house, and he was kind of white, like a sheet. And he started rambling on about, what he's doing. Everything he's doing is legal. And I said, yeah, I know. And going on and on about this, what's going on. He says his militia has taken a mind of its own, he says. He says, I'm being pushed, and I don't want to go there, and he doesn't know what to do. And, man, I said, I don't know. I didn't realize what was going on. But then we put it together later, and so
what's happening is
testimony, and this guy had happened to me and this other guy. We would have been witnesses that it would have been called, and there were 6 witnesses that never were. 6 witnesses were not called to defend Schaeffer by his attorney, and that's one reason he's got inadequate counsel as one of his problems that he brought up.
So what happened with these tactics is this Bill Fulton, as an undercover informant, is pretending to be a voluntary militia member in this like neighborhood watch group, which basically means he starts out by going to a barbecue, and it ends up with death threats and things like that, and trying to get Schaeffer to get involved in some kind of crime, which is just about as far away from Schaeffer as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And this Bill Fulton's just a real piece of work. He actually wrote a book. What's the name of his book, Brian? Do you remember?
Yeah, I got it right here. It is. It's called "The Blood of Patriots: How I Took Down an Anti-Government Militia with Beer, Bounty Hunting, and Badassery." Well, so now, and that is put out by it's written by Bill Fulton and Gene Devon, Ben Bella Books, 2017, 300-page book, and Larry Klayman has filed $185 million, 2 lawsuits totaling $185 million against Fulton, Gene Devon, and Ben Bella Books. And Bill Fulton has his name changed and is now a protected federal witness. Believe it or not. Believe that one or not.
Wow.
So they paid him all this money. They let him off of all his felonies that he had done. They hide him. They pay him money to hook up and help convict this innocent man. Isn't that wonderful? And we've proven this. We've proven that the Anchorage federal prosecutors lied to get a prosecution. They stole the FBI stole up to $3 million of Schaeffer Cox's defense money. And Anchorage prosecutors lied to get a conviction. We've proven all this stuff. And it's pretty amazing. So now Larry Klayman of Freedom Watch is one of the attorneys. And there's a $12,600,000 lawsuit against people in the FBI and that company that took the donations that got stolen by the FBI. There's a lawsuit against that.
Yeah, there was still
Mr. Cox needs
after the fact and screwed up the collection of his legal fees.
Yeah, they took the money away, and he can't defend himself. So he might have been out of prison by now if the government hadn't pulled that thing.
It's really unbelievable. And, I mean, just another one of these tactics. So if one of you guys can kind of explain what happened here, there was another undercover agent, R.J. Olson, who, if I'm getting this right, he basically sabotaged Schaeffer's vehicle so it wouldn't work. And then I guess Schaeffer was trying to leave the country or go to Canada at that point. I don't know if that's correct or not. It has his vehicle sabotaged, and this R.J. Olson is conveniently says, "Well, you can stay at my house," and keeps him in his attic with his family, right? 2 young kids at the time, 3-week-old baby, basically keeps him kidnapped. I don't know if it's against his will or not, in his attic.
Yeah, well, it's kidnapping because it's based on deceit, and it basically amounts to like sort of like an extortion. As this is kidnapping in Alaska law, we had this from Robert John, is one of Schaeffer's early attorneys, and see, the situation there is that Schaeffer, because he was being threatened with all this violence that the informants were threatening to do, he was trying to avoid that by leaving the state.
Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't leave the state in a situation because he had a minor criminal charge pending. So the informants offered to smuggle him out. And during this whole situation, they ended up kidnapping his family to try and stop him from leaving Alaska. So really, this is beyond entrapment. I mean, it's is there any number of felonies the FBI can't get away with committing? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
certainly not super.
You always hear these cases of the FBI, air quotes, catches a terrorist, and it's always somebody they set up, and they buy the materials for them and set them up, and this is what they were trying to do here. They were trying to set Schaeffer up as a terrorist. Essentially, that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, when there's no inclination
for a
terrorist act.
You guys
it's
are
just it's completely contrived.
Mm-hmm. What were you saying, Brian?
Yeah, the local newspaper and the Fairbanks Daily Newsminer went along with it, and to this day, they describe Schaeffer as a sovereign citizen. Well, Schaeffer said he never heard of sovereign citizen before his trial, and it was brought up by an attorney accusing him of being one. And so, if you look up sovereign citizen, there's a definition by Scott Eric Rosenstiel, sovereign citizen, and that is the one that we all are if we are American citizens. And so was George Washington, a sovereign citizen. But if you look up sovereign citizen alone, it will pop up the definition that they use against Schaeffer Cox, which is the opposite of the good guy, make him out to be the nut anti-government terrorist running around town shooting and starting fires or something, And so they make him out to be this guy, and I call him down there, and this outfit, the newspaper, will not retract that statement from that newspaper for no good reason. It's otherwise they're being told to. They're being told to print this baloney about this innocent man and refuse to get the story straight after over 8 years.
Yes, this is part of your agenda to make people think that people who support the Constitution or that are patriotic are nutcases. And they're just trying to lump everything together, so people are afraid of conspiracies, theorists, and just not people who question 9/11 and things like that. So it's just
Schaeffer's a very eloquent speaker.
Yeah, and do you think that's part of the reason why they were going after him? Because he was obviously getting 38% of the vote at 24 years old. I mean, if you watch some of these speeches he gave on YouTube. Sure. I mean, he's a clean-cut looking guy. Looks like somebody that could be your neighbor and somebody you could trust immediately upon seeing. Do you think that played into the reason they went after him, because he was advocating for the principles of liberty and people were listening to him?
Yeah, he's a charismatic speaker. He would get up there, and I've seen him. He just makes sense, and he tells it like it is, and straight from the Constitution. He sounds like one of the founding fathers the way he speaks. And that's from just as a kid. They grew up. His dad is a current Baptist minister in Fairbanks. His mother's a retired teacher, and father's a West Point graduate. So the kids grew up with quite a knowledge of America the way the founding fathers described it. So he runs for office and wins 38% of the vote with that. That's what he was doing. And then he was exposing all this corruption going on. So they said, wow, he's getting all these people together. I've seen him with 500 people in several different churches around here at different times, and in Denny's too, talking to people, and he's absolutely right. So he's down in Denny's, and he had this court for himself. This court, it's brilliant the way he did it. He had this court in there, and he had a conservative common law judge on the phone from someplace, and he presented the case, and we all are witnesses. And his jury of peers found him absolutely not guilty, but the feds came in there and ushered him off to Anchorage and got a conviction, you know. So he didn't get a jury of his peers. He never got evidence. Evidence was denied, exonerating evidence.
It looks like you cut out
No,
there.
no, they ganged up on him and put him in jail to save their own hides. They ganged up on him and put him in prison to save their own hides from the exposure, you know, because he was exposing them. All these people knew this stuff. Same thing. Go ahead.
Well, when we look at the actual federal case where he got convicted, that he's convicted on now, it's unbelievable the due process violations that happen in this situation. They dismiss so many things. They don't let you admit evidence. They cut up his tapes. They withheld tapes from. They withheld the ability to admit exculpatory evidence. They did this thing where instead of letting him admit an entire conversation, they cut up the conversation and had used hearsay rules. They abused the hearsay rules so that the jury could not hear the entire conversation in context. And so when you put a situation like that where, you know, Schaeffer doesn't even know he's being recorded and the informant is trying to provoke him, which is, by the way, is illegal entrapment. And plus they can edit the tapes. I mean, who couldn't make a jury, you know, be suspicious of the situation? I mean, what he got convicted on was murder conspiracy against an unnamed target. So there's just some unspecified target out there. There's an imaginary federal agents that have no names, they have no offices, and there's just some imaginary federal agents which Schaeffer supposedly was going to defend himself against if they tried to murder him and his family.
Yeah. So how can you have conspiracy to commit murder against a person that's not real?
Exactly. In the appeals, they actually brought up the example of, can you conspire to murder Mickey Mouse?
Yeah. So they dropped the conspiracy to commit murder, but they've got the one. What's the other one left?
Well, they dropped murder solicitation based on some kind of evidentiary thing, and then they let a murder conspiracy stay. So that's the Ninth Circuit, their goofy way the Ninth Circuit works. It's one of the most liberal circuit in America.
Yeah, that court needs to go away bad.
They need to break it up and just make a different circuit for Alaska.
So where does this case stand right now? He still has the conspiracy to commit murder charge against him. Is he able to appeal still? Has he exhausted his appeals, or where does that stand?
He can still have another round because he's going into the post-trial. He's already tried to go to the Supreme Court, and they wouldn't take it, but he's still got things he can do that could still end up in the Supreme Court based on the post-trial motions. And there's a lot of crazy things. I mean, he'll still have habeas corpus and, you know, quorum nobis type things. They call it 2255 motions. And I'm sure there's plenty of issues that can arise there that could still end up in the appellate courts. So he might have another chance. Nonetheless, it's a good idea to help him out in recommending a pardon. So we all know that Trump pardoned the Hammonds.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be probably his best course of action at the moment. Let's talk a little bit about where they're keeping him. They're keeping him in a place called a communications management unit. And what are the conditions like in that unit, Bryan?
The conditions are primitive, to say the best. And I got the word from Schaeffer, and then there's another guy in there that his girlfriend sent me this and wanted me to get this out, and I did. I sent it to a guy that can't remember his name that was writing a book about what's going on in the prisons. And it's just, this is a prison built in, I think it was 1936. And here this guy says, it is over 100 degrees inside, and if the heat index is high, you have to basically sit down and try not to move to keep from passing out. There are roaches as big as mice, window in the cell has inadequate screening. You're bit by mosquitoes. Worse than living under a bridge. It just goes. The plumbing is very bad. Cell next to you flushes the toilet and ends up in your toilet. Here are some cells that have the toilets removed. It says, sweetheart, I'm seriously thinking about having you get everyone to start calling OSHA and have them inspect this place. It's very unhealthy, and on like that. He's talking about this stuff. And if the prison finds out that he's getting this word out, he's going to go in the hole. And the hole is just, Schaeffer told me, it stinks, and it's got like vomit on the walls. It's an old cement hole they put you in, and you stay in there for 30 days and don't tell anybody about it, etc. And I don't know why the people put up with that stuff. So maybe they don't know about it. What around like Marion, Illinois, and Terre Haute, Indiana, these places are run. That's what's going on. These people are being tortured. It's murder by prison. Like in Schaeffer's case, he's got scurvy, and basically they have lousy food. You can imagine. They don't want him around. They want to get rid of him. I call it all the Alaska representatives do absolutely nothing except lie to us and put us out, tell us to leave them alone, etc. After we confront them and everything else. So they're all part of it. So I just I don't bother them anymore. I just go on with what I do.
The Communication Management Unit is something that was unconstitutionally created because it's unconstitutional because it gives the CIA control over things happening inside the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Prisons. And so we actually have Homeland Security and CIA controls on what is happening inside these with people that are what's the word they use, Brian? People that have inspirational value. That's how they get designated, right? If they have inspirational value, then they get transferred.
Like if you're, like I said, like a charismatic speaker and knowledgeable, and I mean, that what you mean?
They have inspirational value. That's
total violation.
Inspirational value.
So what types of other people are there? Like what is the population mostly comprised of?
Supermajority are jihadis or suspected jihadis. So this is a very dangerous situation for the minority of Christians there.
I have the email or the you can Google the lawsuit that was put out against Eric Holder et al. About these CMU prisons. If you want to write down this, it is look up AREF as in Frank. ET, let me start over. AREF, comma, ET, space, AL period, space, V period, Holder, HOLDER, comma, et al. AREF, ETAL versus Holder et al. And that pops up a little lawsuit that's going on, and they're experimental prisons, and they're experimenting on they're experimenting on Schaeffer Cox by keeping him locked up for 8 years, 4,000 miles from his family, and seeing his children one day out of 8 years. This is their experiment, I mean, come on, Nazi Germany, here we go. It's time to put a stop to this garbage. Get rid of those people if they have to get the governor or somebody to go in there with a National Guard or something. I mean, these guys, it's a torture prison. The guys are being beaten, and they're not expected to. There was one guy that died. What was his name? About a month and a half ago, a guy died in there. He had a good case going, and I worry about Schaeffer. He had a good case going, and they did him in. He was stabbed to death by him. Might have been a jihadi, maybe the jihadi. How can these guys, it's Communication Management Unit, Schaeffer's under 24-hour surveillance through glass, and yet if somebody finds time enough to go in there and kill these people, and nobody kills the jihadis, it's all the good Christians. Why are they in there with the jihadis in the first place, That's all our representatives, and none of them will do anything about it. And everybody needs to know, because if your sons and daughters out there are good patriotic Americans and they know what's right and wrong and they stick up and they've got a crowd of people that they're telling what's going on, watch out, because you might come and get him, you know. No more freedom of speech out there.
I heard someone was decapitated as well recently in that CMU, but it's hard to get details about that because they don't want to release the coroner records.
Yeah, and then I got word out of there. They were actively trying to cover that up. One person got word out to somebody else, and out of there, it wasn't Schaeffer, but somebody else in there got word to somebody that they were covering it up. So if they can't, you know, they're going to win one way or another. You know, if they can't hide you in court, they'll lock you up in there and make people forget about you. You know, there's people that have been locked up for 35 years that are not guilty too.
So Schaeffer even had to sue some of his own attorneys so that he could get out of their horrible representation. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yeah, he actually had an attorney who was trying to make him seem like he was insane, and this was not a good time to bring that up, you know, because
that was what, the second court-appointed
terrible
attorney.
Defense, you know, and
she actually came out and said that Schaeffer was delusional and needed to remain in prison and have forced therapy, and that was going to help him. So I guess what they're doing to him is the forced therapy, right?
Yeah, she was the one that was anti-gun, right?
Oh yeah, she's anti-gun.
Anti-Second Amendment.
So how did Schaeffer get tied up with her? How did that?
She was a court-appointed attorney. After the first attorney, Nelson Traverso in Fairbanks, after he sort of, I think they threatened him or something. So he lost the case, you know, of course. And then they gave her to, you know, just to make it look like he had a representation or something. Then she comes up with that in front of him. And that's his representation says he's delusional and should remain in prison and have forced therapy. I think I want to know what he did. I helped him all through all this, fired her and got another one. More of the same, you know, and then they wouldn't even let him use Robert John, the attorney that got him off of all the Alaska state charges in the first place. They wouldn't let him use that guy, you know.
What do you mean they wouldn't let him use him? He was.
Oh, what was it they had? They had some excuse, I forget. Some excuse that the guy, I forget what they used for an excuse to not let him have Robert John, but.
You know, I don't know about that specific situation, but I know sometimes, you know, you can't have an attorney. An attorney's not allowed to represent when they might be a witness, because that's considered a disqualifying motion situation. Yeah, conflict of interest.
Okay. It's just like what they're doing to Trump now. You know, they're pushing stuff through, and they've gotten away with it.
Yeah.
They didn't get away with it on Senator Ted Stevens, but they got their hands slapped. And one of them committed suicide over that one.
Yeah, more than likely, this situation with Senator Ted Stevens is part of the same kind of operation. I think they target Ted Stevens so they could pass Obamacare, you know, and they target people like Schaeffer Cox because they're considered a political threat. Schaeffer Cox, as I understand it, was actually getting Ron Paul type points put in the Alaska GOP platform. So, you know, there's a lot of people that don't like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and of course,
it's going after their power. I mean, that's the government. The state wants more power.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's all comes down from Obama down the filters down. There was Karen Loeffler at the time; she's gone now. And then Loretta Lynch, Eric Holder, Charles Samuels. And then there's the attorney prosecutor Joseph Bettini, Scrocky, and Lamoureux are the ones that pulled this. And Scrocky is oh man. Yvonne Lamoureux, for her part in it, she got promoted to federal judge now. She's not just a prosecutor. She got a new job for her part.
So the prosecution against Schaeffer was mainly carried out by Yvonne Lamoureux and Stephen Scrocky, isn't that right?
Yeah, Scrocky, Bottini, and of course Loeffler was the.
Yeah, but Bottini was involved too, and that's important because Bottini is part of this Polar Pen operation that targeted Ted Stevens, and so we have this a suspicion here that there might be a link and a very similar mode of operation at the least.
Yeah.
So what happened with the Ted Stevens trial? He was not convicted, right?
Yeah, Ted Stevens was there was a guilty verdict, I believe, but it was thrown out because there was a lot of misconduct. The misconduct basically amounted to the fact that the DOJ made a plea deal with one of the witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
That was Bill Allen of Vico, which is an oil services company. And Bill Allen was having sex with an underage woman and underage girl, about 16 years old. And this was used as leverage, which the jury certainly should have found out about, because that is something you can impeach a witness on, of course. The jury absolutely has a right to know if the DOJ can throw someone in jail and if the DOJ is doing plea deals with someone.
Which doesn't stop the DOJ from doing that routinely in other cases.
Yeah, that's how they operate in a lot of ways. That's how the FBI gets things done.
Mm-hmm.
They make plea deals with people, and if they don't say the version of quote unquote truth that they want to hear, they go to jail. You know, we see this going on with Jerome Corsi right now. He's being pressured to lie.
Yeah, same thing. They're getting that's
FBI,
one of those.
DOJ's out of hand, and what they need to do is they just need to bring back private prosecutions like we had in the 1800s, and forget about this public prosecution thing where they have a giant multi-billion-dollar pyramid of prosecutors that are potentially corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Citizens' grand juries. That's what we need. Darn them. If it was a citizen's grand jury, Schaeffer Cox would never be in prison, as would thousands of them. There's thousands of people with these same kind of convictions. Another one's Charles Dyer. Charles Dyer is a good Marine. Convicted on hearsay. They were getting a divorce, and his wife said that he was fooling around with their little kids. And they just convicted him without any evidence because they're getting a divorce and he wanted custody. So there he sits, 14 years. He's been in prison.
Wow.
Just disgusting. Man, what we run into here, it's just disgusting.
And to get back to the Ninth Circuit and how liberal they are, Schaeffer, as I understand it, Schaeffer's indictment was not even returned in open court, which is something that, in Magna Carta countries is unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
But the Ninth Circuit just seems to think we're like living in Central Europe or something, and that doesn't matter. They think that you can just return an indictment into a chambers privately to a secretary, to a clerk, basically. Mm-hmm. And this is the kind of thing that they do. So, there's questions raised about, are we even sure there was a grand jury indictment? I mean, and another thing is there were like 4 indictments, which in my opinion is a violation of double jeopardy, but I guess this is the way things are done. Most people are surprised to find out that you can be tried in a grand jury like 4 times. But it wasn't until the 4th indictment that Schaeffer's surprised with this thing about suddenly he's supposed to have committed a murder conspiracy against an unnamed target.
Yeah.
That was like 18 months into the whole prosecution, wasn't it? 12 or 18 months even?
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. Can you imagine being surprised with something like that when you think all you're going to be talking about is the Second Amendment? It's got to be terrible.
They drain you financially. You're just drained financially and locked up.
So what is? I know we talked.
No exonerating evidence. No exonerating evidence.
You're talking about the exculpatory evidence that was blocked from being.
Yeah, he would have been. he would never have gone to prison with it if he had used us, if he had access to his eyewitnesses and physical evidence.
Yeah. This reminds me, I know they're very different, the cases, but this reminds me a lot of Ross Ulbricht in his trial. There was a lot of evidence there that was blocked as well. And he was another individual who was going against the grain, and the government had to take him down.
Yeah, so that's where all our leaders are that want to stand up and the ones that would have town hall meetings and stuff like that, like Schaeffer did. There's thousands of them in prison. Believe it or not, we know. I guarantee you.
So I know that in the links that Jacob sent me, that Schaeffer is able to communicate a little bit to the outside through letters, and some of these letters are posted on a blog, and I'm sure Bryan can give the website. But I know in one of them he was talking about because so many people have been calling the prison and complaining about Schaeffer's treatment, that he speculates that's one of the reasons that they put him in solitary confinement.
Sure, he's being punished because he's getting the word out what's going on. Mm-hmm. And they just want to keep those guys in there and manage their communications is what they're called to do. Manage the community. He gets 15 minutes a week on the phone, as far as I know, and does have email. But then when he goes in the hole, he loses all his emails and they dock him. I was off. I've been off over years. I've been off for many months that they wouldn't allow him to say anything to anybody. And then they cut off his secretary, Angela. They cut Angela off from seeing from getting. She's the one that handles his money and does everything for him, and they're no longer allowed to communicate.
Yeah, and when they do that, they can just come up with something that's so completely totalitarian. They can say something like, well, if you quoted something from something else that weren't your words, then that's circumvention of the communication control. And
wow.
They can just, it's basically about the most totalitarian, denial of due process, criminal system that you can imagine. I mean, truly, domestic terrorists are the people working in government that are trying to do these things. They want to set an example to anyone who thinks you might actually exercise your constitutional rights.
Yeah. So what can people do if they want to help? What are some avenues to either donate monetarily or to just help in any way to get the word out?
To get the word out, tell everybody, and
share this podcast.
Yeah. Tune in here.
Best thing they can do is get the word out, and let's go ahead and give out
Larry
the
Clayman.
websites. The main website
Larry
is
Clayman.
freeschaeffer.com. That's FREESCHAEFFER.com. Okay, and if people are interested in looking at court materials, there's another website called SchaefferForStatehouse.com. And there's also some YouTube channels. There is Free Schaeffer is one. Another is Year of Jubilee. That's Rudy Davis's channel. He's been covering Schaeffer Cox for a real long time now. That's it's Lone Star 1776. His website is Year of Jubilee, but his YouTube is Lone Star 1776.
Okay. And I'm going to link all these links on the show notes page for today's show, which I said it at the top, but I'll say it again, is lionsofliberty.com/FF160. I'm going to put all the links that Bryan sent me. I'll link the YouTube videos, embed them right there so people can find it all in one place, because I encourage anyone and everyone to go down this rabbit hole to really investigate and understand the true injustice here, because it will make you sick. It's made me sick learning about it.
And there's also a video. You can go on YouTube and look at a video called "Framed by the FBI?" The story of Schaeffer Cox. That's a 30-minute video, and it's all fact And that's only, that'll start getting you interested in it there. But there's a lot of tentacles from there out, But that'll give you the whole basic story for 30 minutes there. Pretty amazing. There's a movie out, it's supposed to be coming out about it, called Plan 241, but it's not out yet because whatever reason. But it's going to be a movie, and Schaeffer's got books out. What is the name of his book?
He has a book called The Lost Lyrics of Schaeffer Cox.
Oh, yeah.
He also has written some children's stories. One is called The Way of the Sea, which I especially like that one. The other is called Ace and Baron. And he also has a short story called Lions or Needles, which I also particularly liked. He really is a literary talent.
This is one of the people we need to make America great again, and they know that, so they lock him up.
Yeah.
And didn't Jordan Page, isn't he about to release a song about Schaeffer Cox? Jordan was just on this previous Monday, actually, was just on our Monday show with host Mark Claire. And I think I remember correctly that he said that. Yeah. I'm not sure when that comes out, but.
Well, I'm not sure.
Everybody pray for Schaeffer Cox. Donate to Larry Clayman, Schaeffer Cox. Tell everybody that you know or you don't know, because we're next,
Yeah.
So I'll just give you guys, if you want to give you guys each a minute here to say some parting words. So Bryan, Jacob, you want to go first?
Well, I'll just say that one thing to remember about Schaeffer Cox's situation is I think this is mostly motivated by attack on the family. They went after his children. They tried to take his children to Alaska Child Services, and he tried to defend himself with an attorney, and they wouldn't put up with that. So this is very much a family issue of breaking up families.
Yeah, he's got a little boy that kid's 10, and his little daughter is younger and hasn't seen him one time in all these years. It's just disgusting. These people are evil. They need to be hunted down. In the old days, in the 1880s, they'd have hung these people. That's what they need. I'll tell you that. But they need to be hung.
Well, I want to thank you guys for coming on the show and taking some time out of your days. I know this is something that you're both very passionate about, and thank you for helping to educate others, to educate myself, bringing this to my attention, and keep up the good fight.
Okay, good deal. Thanks.
All right, so that'll cut there. So this will air on Friday. So I'll get it out to you guys. You can blast it out to your networks, and I'll do the same on my end, and we'll get this
great.
This thing
How
rolling.
many people do you think we just talked to?
Well, nobody yet, but on Friday when it goes, on Friday when it goes out, we'll get at least. I would think with a show like this, we'll get maybe close to 5,000 downloads, but a minimum of 3,000, and then. I mean, the thing that I'll put this on Facebook and on YouTube also, and things can just catch fire and go viral. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the way we do it. Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, thank you, Bryan.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
All right, and thank you, Jacob.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
All right, we'll be talking.
Talk to you later.
All right.
I'll send you some links you might want to put in the show notes.
Yeah, send me everything else you got. I think at the one point I referred to Bryan sending me the links. Of course, it's you that sent the links up. I'll make that clear when I edit this. But yeah, thanks a lot for all your help.
Okay, take care.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
Hope you guys really enjoyed today's episode, and I know enjoying it, saying you enjoyed it is hard to say when we're talking about just a disgusting, despicable case like this, a horrible, horrible injustice that Schaeffer Cox is suffering from. I want to thank Bryan Christie and Jacob Shreffler for coming on the show. I think I misspoke during the episode when I was talking about who had sent me a bunch of links and whatnot. just want to highlight that Jacob was instrumental in pulling this together. I want to thank him for that, sending me a lot of links to research this case and learn about it myself. So I thank Jacob for that, and I thank Bryan for coming on the show to talk about his friend, Schaeffer Cox, who is suffering big time. And Bryan's known Schaeffer since before the arrest. He was friends with him when this whole thing went down. Should have been called to testify, and if things would have gone differently, and he was called to testify, I'm sure that Schaeffer would probably be a free man today. So, I really do want to encourage you guys to go to the show notes page. I'll say it again one more time: lionsofliberty.com/ff160. There's more content, more links, more videos than I've ever had on a show notes page for Felony Friday. I'm passionate about this case. I'm passionate about getting word out about the case of Schaeffer Cox, and I want you guys to become passionate too. So that is why I'm dumping all this information out here. I encourage you to go down the rabbit hole, to learn everything there is to know about this case, and then to become an advocate, an advocate for release, an advocate for freedom, an advocate for justice for Schaeffer Cox. So please check out the show notes page. Check out all that information. Please share this episode. Please tweet Donald Trump. Tweet this episode to Donald Trump. Call for clemency. Reach out to people in the clemency movement, in the commutation movement, people in the criminal justice reform movement, and let them know about this injustice. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of people, probably on both the left and the right, that look at this case and they don't look at the details. They just see what the media narrative is. And we got to break through that. We got to bust through that narrative. And the way to do that is just to know the case inside and out, and to encourage them to listen to podcasts like this and to watch the fantastic YouTube videos that are out there talking about this case. So, guys, there's not a whole lot more to say about this. I said my piece at the top of the show about joining the Pride. We definitely want you guys to be a part of our group, our community that's growing here at Lions of Liberty. You can do that by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. And that's really all I got to say, guys. Please learn about this case, share this episode, tweet Donald Trump, and ask for freedom, ask for a commutation of Schaeffer Cox's sentence, because this is absolutely ridiculous what this patriot is going through. That's all I got, guys. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.